Welcome to the Homeschool Aficionado podcast. I had the pleasure of spending over an hour talking to and picking the brain of Kyra. Kyra is the founder and the lead instructor of these writing classes. She calls it the Writer's Toolbox. Which is so cool about this, when you listen to the interview, you're going to find out that she created this business out of a need. Yes, she was passionate. Yes, she was good. Yes, she had experience. But families and kids started to suggest the need to her, and she just fulfilled the need. So you're going to love that. You're also going to love how each and every child, each and every student that she interacts with, she sees them as an individual. You know, the Writer's Toolbox is not about, I have all these tools and I'm going to use all these tools for everybody. It's about doing specific things in order to make sure that your child, or if your student watches this, or you actually learn how to study better, how to write better, how to really get ahead in life. It was so cool talking to her because what she's teaching is not just for when you're going through school, but it's for like everyday life. You're going to take the tools that you learned from her through high school, through college, and onto life. So sit back and enjoy. This is Kyra, and this is the Writer's Toolbox here on the Homeschool Aficionado podcast. Enjoy.
Hello, Kyra. What's going on?
Glenn, how are you? Good morning.
Good morning to you. Thank you so much for joining me here today. I want to just really quickly say, I had no idea who you were, but then I started a tennis team with Sharice, and she said, hey, I know you're doing this podcast thing. You got to talk to Kyra. I said, who is Kyra? She said, oh, she is thebomb.com. You got to talk to her. So you and I first met because we were at a homeschool expo at the Y.
Yes.
And Sharice came over to me, and you know how she is. She's really excited. She said, she's here, she's here, she's here. And so I went over and met you. You know, you had other people at your table, so we didn't have a chance to talk. But I said, hey, I would love to have you on my podcast because I've heard that you are doing some amazing things in the lives of young people. So that's why you're here. So give us a quick introduction of who you are and what you're doing.
Hey, well, for a quick introduction, first, you already said my name. I went down a list of things that would describe me. I'm a woman of God. I'm a wife
Yes.
to Dwight, my husband. We have 2 married children, a daughter, Jules, who is a nurse practitioner, and I have a son, Seth, who is a U.S. federal agent in the Air Force. We have 3 grandchildren, although they actually live in Arizona. So unfortunately, don't get a chance to see them as much as we would like to see them. I'm a retired homeschool mom. We homeschooled ourselves for 11 years. I'm also a former Right Shop representative. We did that for 10 years, where we traveled up and down the East Coast, basically to the various homeschool conventions. As a representative of Right Shop, my husband and I both did that together. And I've been teaching writing, literary analysis, as well as study skill classes for about the past 21 years in the Charlotte area. Yeah, this makes 21 years coming up. Yes.
Well, congratulations. And honestly, thank you for your service. Honestly, my dad was in the school system, not in the homeschool system, but in the school system for, I would say maybe like 33 years or something like that or whatever. He started and retired in the school system. So he has seen how kids and the school system has transitioned over the years. Honestly, for you to be committed for as long as you are, I appreciate you and I thank you for your service because you know we need all the help that we can get in the United States of America and just as a people in general.
Yes.
So that is awesome.
You're welcome.
So what inspired you to start teaching kids? Well, let's go all the way back. What inspired you and your husband to decide to homeschool your kids?
Well, first of all, I'll say that I homeschooled initially as a single mom because my former husband actually left me and when I was pregnant with our daughter. And so I was a single mom homeschooling for probably a good maybe 9 years or so, 8 to 9 years. And I could not have done that without the support of the homeschool family. I was in Maryland at the time.
The community.
Yeah.
That's good.
Yes. And I was able to co-start a co-op there. At our height, we were up to about 50 families actually when I left. And I left, of course, when I met my husband, who's a native of Charlotte, White. He was a widower at the time. And so we got married and he had a son. So then I went on to homeschool his son, who is my son. And
How old was he?
he,
How old was he when you started homeschooling him?
he was 11 at the time.
11.
He
Okay.
was 11, Joel was 14. And so at that time, I had homeschooled, and I had really planned to homeschool them all the way up to high school. But our daughter is very musically inclined.
Mhm.
And at the time, she couldn't decide if she wanted to be a musician or if she wanted to be a nurse or if she wanted to be a doctor.
Okay. Okay.
And so at that time, we decided when we actually moved to Charlotte, Charlotte had a law program in one of their high schools. Actually, it was in Garinger High School. It was she was the last class that entered that program, and which was an amazing program because they had access to lawyers. They were taught by lawyers. She was on the debate team. I mean, a lot of different things that were involved in that. But as a result of that, she decided she did not want to be a lawyer. But when she went to school, she decided that she really wanted to pursue music. So, I mean, she was in music as well. She was in the band. She actually plays music, plays instruments, and she also sings. So she decided to pursue the music, although she always had a pull for being in the medical field. Well, long story short, she ended up actually going to college on a music scholarship, which really paid for everything for her through music. But she studied nursing, and she did that for about 2 to 3 years. Actually, it sort of became a little bit difficult because music is very demanding in the college level. So it's came a little bit, can't have two demanding careers. You'll be there for 8 years. So she had to forego the music and continue with nursing. And so today she's a nurse practitioner.
Now, what school did you go to?
She went to Winston-Salem State.
Okay, cool. So here in North Carolina.
Yeah, she went to
Sweet.
Winston-Salem State. We looked at multiple schools, and they had at that time the best NCLEX rating in terms of students who took the nursing board test and passed. At that time they were passing like a 98%, 98, 99%, which was really, really good. So there wasn't any discussion as to where she was going.
Okay. So now, when you married Dwight, what was the conversation like when you said, "Hey, I homeschool my daughter, and I plan on homeschooling your son, who is now going to be our son"? What was that conversation like? Was he just like, "Okay, cool, go"?
Pretty much. She was very, very open to it. Our situation may be a little bit different because we were both in our early 40s at the time. And so when we did that, we already knew basically what life was like, what we wanted. We did a lot of talking and discussion. I always tease him. I bought this book with 100 questions to ask him about all kinds of things. So we went, and it was a long distance relationship. I was in Maryland. He was in Charlotte at the time, and we met every other week, basically. I flew here, he flew to Maryland. And so with that discussion, he was very open to it. He had grown up mainly in private school and Christian school, so he wasn't really, he was really. In fact, Seth was open to it as well. So we really didn't have any kind of pushback regarding that at all.
Okay, so go back to your daughter, and when you started homeschooling, you did it from day one, or you did?
Basically from day one,
Okay.
which when you mentioned about your father being in education, I come from a line of educators. Both my parents were educators. Both my grandparents were educators. My aunts and uncles, many of my cousins are in education, either teachers or administration. And I
Wow.
did get pushback from them. They figured, well, for preschool, that may be okay. Once we get to kindergarten and first grade, in fact, my mother even took me around to certain schools, and she said, well, we'll pay for private school if you want to take care of Christian
Yes,
school.
yes.
And I just felt a calling from the time she was probably about 2 years old that we were going to homeschool. I was going to homeschool. At the time it was only me. I was going to homeschool. And that's when the Teaching Home magazine came out years and years ago. I'm not sure if it's still in existence now. And so through that, I had been reading all about homeschooling for probably about at least 2 years before I even started homeschooling. And I formally started when she was about 4 years old.
Okay, so when you started homeschooling her, were you already teaching kids privately?
No, I
Or
was not
okay.
teaching,
So how did you do that? How'd you get into what you're doing right now, teaching kids privately, and how does that relate to you doing the homeschool? How did all of that come about?
That came about when I came to Charlotte, actually. In
Okay,
terms
you
of
just started in Charlotte. Okay,
Yeah, that
cool.
started in Charlotte. Although I had taught, of course, I taught my own daughter, but I had also, what really led up to, when I look back, I could see God's hand was in everything to prepare me for this. I
Yes.
was a co-leader of a co-op that started with about 10 families, myself and another lady family. And at that time when I started, Jewel would have been about 4, she was 4 years old. We formally started at 5 when when the younger kids were kindergarten, and we took them all the way up to 8th grade actually, but our co-op grew to to
50
many,
people,
many
you said 50 families.
about 50 families
Yeah.
and about 125 kids at that time. And I think it actually grew even after I left, because I left, of course, when I got married and came to Charlotte at that time. But it did grow. And so at that time, I actually wasn't sure what I was going to actually teach for the students, but I taught the science experiments for the kindergarten through fifth grade kids through the different levels. That's what my focus was, even though I'm not really a science person, but the Lord put me in that situation. But what really helped me was that I had a business called Scribes and More when I was in Maryland. And that business really focused on word processing. At that time, computers were fairly new, and there had a lot of friends who needed papers typed. Even in high school, I typed papers for my parents. They were both getting their masters at the time, and many of my relatives were getting degrees, or friends getting degrees. Nobody knew how to type papers, and so I learned how to type papers back on the old typewriters on the IBM.
Yeah. So you were typing papers for them?
I was typing papers when I was in high school. Yes, yes.
That is cool.
That's how I started. And when I did Scribes and More, I actually, through my pastor's wife, I was introduced to a gentleman who was getting his graduate degree. He was a foreign student. He was from Israel, and he wanted someone to help him to write his paper. He actually preferred to transcribe it, to record his paper.
Yeah, his voice. Yeah.
Yeah, and then I would transcribe it. Well, prior to that, I had also learned medical transcription, because that's what I was also using to help to pay the bills, was medical transcription. But that was sort of up and down. It wasn't always a secure type, and it just depends upon if you got a doctor, and if you like to, if you didn't get a doctor, if you could understand the doctor. And so at that point, I said, okay, I will do that. But the word spread, and so I ended up working with a lot of foreign students, helping them to take their papers from broken English in many cases to more formal academic papers. Many of them were writing papers. They were writing their theses for their master's degree. They were writing their dissertation for the doctorate degree. And I did that for about 3 or 4 years. And at the same time, I also became the news editor for our state newsletter for homeschoolers, which was the Chen newsletter that I did. And I did that for about 7 years. So I look back, I think all of these things actually helped me to develop into what God opened the door for here. Because when I moved here, I had no idea what I was just going to homeschool. I had no idea that, things would evolve to where they are today.
My goodness. Okay. And that business that you had back then, that was just word of mouth.
It was,
You were just in position, and people started asking you questions. Could you do this? And you started doing it, and then the word spread, and that's how you got clients.
It was basically word of mouth. I did have some students say, well, give me a flyer. I'll put it up in our student union building, or I'll put it up in this hall. And so I made a few flyers. Also, at that time, Maryland also had a Christian Yellow Pages, a little book called The Shepherd's Guide, which
Oh yeah, yes.
you may have heard of it. It was
I've heard of that.
Yes. And so I had a little ad in there, and it was basically word of mouth. Most of the students that I had were basically word of mouth, which was really interesting. I had many foreign students, and I learned a lot about their culture. They learned about us. And so it was really, really a good fit. And it also, when I look back, helped me to learn a lot about all the different types of formatting, although I had already written papers for MLA and APA and so forth. But I learned a lot as well on a lot of these topics that I had to write papers for, had to help them write papers for.
So now, still talking about back then, what do you think contributed to you being so passionate to help young people in this specific area? Is it because you come from Lone Line educators, or what do you think set you up to be so passionate about teaching young people this, about writing and all that?
Well, the writing, I think, came a little bit second. In teaching my own students and teaching the kids at our co-op, I realized that many students did not have a lot of research skills, homeschoolers. They did not know how to present papers. They did not know how to write papers. And so as my daughter got closer to middle school, and in middle school, I developed first the study skills class. And it was study skills and research. And so I taught the research and the study skills, and many homeschoolers didn't know how to study.
Right.
They really don't have a way to actually study formally as many students do in a traditional school, especially for tests or quizzes or things of that nature. And so that's where everything really started with that class. And then when I came to Charlotte, I taught that class here, and I also taught that class even after I left a couple of the co-ops I was in here, when my son went to traditional school. He went to traditional high school because he wanted to join Air Force ROTC, um, which was good because that helped him to decide, yes, he wanted to go in the Air Force, and he's doing really well in there now. Um, that is really where things started. Then while I was teaching those classes, somehow one of the moms in the area found out that I had been the editor of the Maryland State newsletter, and she asked me about writing, and she said, "Well, do you know how to teach writing or anything about writing?" I said, "Well, yes, I do." And she said, "Well, I'm having trouble with my son. Can I show you some curriculum and you can teach me how to teach my son?" And I said, "Okay, I'll do that." And the more we got into it, she said, "Well, can you just teach him yourself?" And so I said, "Well, okay." And I had about 3 or 4 other friends who would also like a class. And so that's
That's it.
really how it started. And then the next
Wow.
year, those same parents wanted me to go on to the next level and teach. And then word of mouth, they had other friends or they had siblings that were younger and they wanted classes. And so I always say that, God opened the doors here. It was not something I said, "Oh, I want to teach writing classes and this is how I'm going to start." God opened the door, and he's opened the door everywhere. I've taught from Huntersville to, all over the Charlotte area. I was in Cabarrus County for quite a while because I taught with Enjoy Science when Enjoy Science was here.
Yes.
We actually taught in a co-op together, and then we actually went to several other places after the co-op closed, and we taught together so that we were both in the same building together. I've taught at some private schools. God's opened the door wherever he wanted me to teach. And I always say God always brings the students to me that he wants me to teach every year. We pray for the students and God brings them.
Yeah, but it's something, but it's like it's like you're in a preparation stage. And then when someone asks you something, you've already prepared. And
Yeah,
so it's like when they ask you for something, you give them a service, and the service is so good because you've been doing this, you've been prepared already. So it's
right.
like God's planting the seed way back when,
Yeah,
and you've been watering that seed. Then all of a sudden says, "Hey, can you do something that you've already been prepared to do?" It's like,
exactly.
yeah, I sure can.
Exactly. That's exactly
That
what
is
happened.
good. So tell me, what are some of the biggest transformations that you've seen and young people that you've dealt with over the years? You can go back when you were just starting out, or even now. What are some of the biggest transformations you've seen?
Well, for transformations, I think the homeschool community, because I've always taught basically homeschooled students. Every now and then I will get a student who is not homeschooled, especially if I have a later class who has gone to traditional school when their parents want them to take, one of my classes. Or there was a time that I would do ACT, SAT class review, test review over the summer. And when I did that, I would have students that were homeschooled as well as students who were not homeschooled. I have really been blessed. My husband and I talk about this all the time, to have really well behaved, well respected students that are very respectful. I've never had any type of behavior problems or anything of that nature
Really?
in any of my classes. I've just, we pray for our students. We try to get to know the families as much as we can, and we pray for them as well. So I've been blessed that I have to deal with any of that, and I think I also have rules and parameters that I try to set up at the beginning of the year that students and parents have to sign. And I think the students also know that if they do get out of line and it becomes a problem, that I won't hesitate to contact the parent. Most parents either at our location or via email or telephone or whatever it is. So the students that I have seen throughout the years have really blessed me with how they have been respectful in class and what they've done in class and so forth. The one thing I see, and I saw this even with my own kids, is that these days kids tend to be involved in a lot of different things. And even with my own kids, I had to pull back and I had to say, you cannot do everything. You want to do XYZ. Our daughter was in music, she was in dance, she was in the band, she wanted to do the choir. I said, something has to go. You can't do it all. You can't be, and still she would try to get as much as she could, but still.
Right. Yeah, it's like we want to do so many things, and it's like the more things that we want to do or actually attempt to do and spend our time on, our skill level, it gets watered down.
Exactly.
You play 10 sports, you're not going to be an all-star at 10 sports.
That's right.
But if you just pick one, then you can be something great.
Exactly. I actually cover that in the study skills class, where we talk a lot about goal setting, time management, being able to estimate your time that you would take to do particular assignments, looking at your schedule for the week, seeing how much time you really spend on various activities and things that you need to do or you want to do, how you can incorporate that. I think we all do that, have done that in our lives. Nice to have done this or nice to really do this, but we do have to settle on, and not really settle, that may not be the right word, but we do have to decide on what's going to be the best thing that I can do. I can watch somebody else do something and maybe that'll be good enough. And then I can engage in this other activity.
Right.
And I think I faced some of the same things. I was into dance growing up. I was into music growing up, and I had to make a decision which one I was going to actually pursue. And so I put dance on the back burner for a while. I pursued music. I was actually a music major in high school. We could do majors in high school when I was in Baltimore. I was a music major in high school, which made me realize that there was a lot of other people who could play music by ear, and I was not one of those.
What instruments did you play?
I played flute and violin. I actually played violin most of the time, but then as I got to high school, we had too many violin players in the orchestra, and so I learned how to play flute, and that became my main instrument in high school when I was a backup for violin.
You sort of already said this. I want to talk about how your approach is different than all the other. Because I mean, you can get online and probably find hundreds and thousands of different writing coaches,
Right.
whatever. So I want you to tell me about how your writing, your study skills that you particularly teach are different. Now, you've already said a few things I want to highlight is you actually pray for the kids.
Mhm.
And that right there separates you from a lot of other teachers and tutors and institutions around the nation already. But the other thing that you said is even if the kid is not in your face and you're not one-on-one teaching them in person, you still want to know who the family is and you still contact the family. So there's not a big gap between you and the child and you and the parents. You are still working together. It's almost like you become part of the family in order to reach whatever goal that the family wants. So I already had those highlights, but is there anything else that set you? Another thing you said when you would talk about the study skills class,
Mhm.
to me, that was just sounding like life skills because the same things that you're teaching these young people as relates to them studying, we as adults need to do those same things when we're going through life and picking a job and deciding what we're going to do and deciding how we're going to raise our kids. We have to prioritize stuff. So it's like you're teaching them life skills at a young age that they're going to use for the rest of their life. So with all those in mind, like I've always said a lot about, but with all those in mind, like, what else separates you from everyone else that teaches study skills and writing skills?
I don't always look at what everybody else is doing, so I'm not really sure what they are doing. Many times I can even pray about certain classes that I teach. And every year every summer we go through and I tweak the classes sometime a little bit to as either after praying about it, it's either, God is calling me to tweak certain things. There's certain things that I need to change, clarify, or even take out of a class, even put in a class. Like I will have a new thing that will be coming next year. We can talk about that a little bit later. It was one of the questions you asked me. So I have something new that I am going to be adding for next year. But the methods that I choose, I just want to go back to say one thing. One person that really inspired me, even though I come from a family of educators, was Marva Collins. I don't know if you ever heard of her before, but I think she was a teacher or principal in Chicago who taught underprivileged students. I say underprivileged because they were basically in a very poor area. The school didn't have a lot of resources in this public school. The students, many of them were deemed students that could not learn. And she taught them using the Socratic method and other type of methods to actually soar. Many of them ended up getting full scholarships into colleges. Years later, when I met Dwight, and found out that one of his cousins' sons had actually gone to her school. And so I was able to get
Wow.
a firsthand, idea of what it was like to have been there. But she wrote several books and she was actually featured on 60 Minutes. And this may have been back in, I don't know, but the 90s or early 200s to 2000s. That,
Okay.
and one thing that she said that sort of stuck with me was that in her school, she would prefer to hire teachers who were people who were passionate about teaching versus people who had education degrees but were just there to collect a check. Some of her
Okay.
teachers were not trained teachers in terms of having a teaching degree, but they were passionate about imparting what they knew or the knowledge that they were acquiring to other students. And that's basically how I feel. My degree is in finance. I do have a bachelor's degree. It's in finance, so it's not in education. I've read a lot of books on education, and of course, coming from a family, my husband says you just have education and teaching in your DNA. It's just there.
Yes, it's in your
And
blood.
maybe that's what it is, because I don't, but I did read a lot of papers, that I type a lot of papers about all kinds of different elements of education. My father went on and got he had two masters. One that was in administration, and he was a high school administrator. He did a lot of different administration type things, but he also did, he's a high school principal, vice principal. So having read all those papers and so forth, I think maybe it just is in my DNA. But the one thing that I do, I have a couple of philosophies that I like to follow. One is to master the skill. I really want students to master whatever we are studying. So we go over the assignments. I give them opportunities to make corrections on assignments. The other thing that I want them to actually do is to enjoy the writing, enjoy whatever it is that I'm teaching them, whether it's writing, whether it's literature we're going over. Some of the classes, like I have junior level classes that we play games with. Well, I play games in all the classes if time permits, because we do Jeopardy games and other games. It just depends. On my literature class, we always do who is it character type of a game. So I try to mix it up a lot. Having taught the study skills and learned a lot about that for so long, I try to use all the different elements of teaching, whether the student is auditory in learning, whether they're visual, or whether they're kinesthetic. And so I try to incorporate a lot of those elements within the various lessons that I teach. And the classes I teach that are in person are the exact same ones that I teach online. They're live, just like we're talking now. I present those the same way. I have to tweak a little bit because there's certain things, of course, you cannot do if you're online that you could do in person. Whereas if I hand cards out to students in person, then I can't hand cards out, but I may send them a card or send them some things via email the night before for them to use in class the next day. So there's some things I've had to actually tweak regarding that. My methods, I don't know if they have a name, and with the exception of I want to try to hit all three of the different learning styles. Now, I don't hit that with every single lesson. Every lesson doesn't have all three learning styles in it, but I want to help the students to understand that one thing that I've read and that I've learned is that most of the time students are receiving material in a learning style which may not be at their forefront. Many times we are providing information in the auditory way, and there are a lot of students that are not auditory. Auditory is pretty hard. It's for you to hear it, retain it, understand it. And I proved this when I was homeschooling my own daughter, gave her and myself an auditory test, and we both did really poorly on it. And so I had to end up. Actually, I bought Odyssey tapes back then. I'm sure everybody is familiar with Odyssey. Odyssey tapes. Odyssey actually had a curriculum that I bought that had questions to all the different stories, and so we would listen to the story, and we would go back and listen to and try to answer the questions. And then we realized, oh, was that actually in the story? Let's go back and listen to it again. And so through that and sort of training yourself to really listen carefully, that helped both of our scores to grow up. Now, I do know there are some people that can listen to things and they can hear it. They don't have to take a lot of notes. They remember things. My husband is like that, actually. He's taken quite a few Bible classes online. And then for the classes he's taken, he can sit and listen to a lecture. I look at his notes. He has like 2 or 3 sentences on the notes. He takes a test and he gets in the high 90s. I could not do that. I'm a visual person. And so I know that there's some students who are very visual. And so I try to present things in a visual way, but there's some in a way that is somewhat of in some cases, an outline. So I provide like syllabuses, I provide homework logs, I provide a lot of things in all 3 different areas, learning areas. The main learning areas there's a lot of sub learning areas, but I try to do that, incorporating that within the classes that I teach.
So, we listen to stuff all the time. So, for example, kid go to class, they sit still in the desk, the instructor is up in the front of the classroom, they talk for 45, 55 minutes, and then they dismiss the class and say, hey, I'm giving you a test next week on everything I just talked about. So what you're saying is the majority of students, if they're just sitting there listening and attempting to take notes or whatever, they're really not getting what the instructor would like them to get.
Exactly.
anyone that stands up in front of a student or even a parent that stands up in front of their child and just talks, expecting that student to get everything they need to get just by listening to them talk, we're really missing the boat here.
Yeah, there's been a lot of studies about that. I don't have my statistics in front of me for my study skills class, but there's been a lot of study about that. I think that we have so many distractions, our mind wanders, different things occur. Everybody has all kind of things that's just, happening, whether it's thinking, whether you're hungry or, I mean, there's a lot of factors that can actually contribute to you not being able to listen well. It could be the temperature in the room. It could be something you ate, whether you're hungry or whether you're thinking about the food you're going to eat after you're out of where, your actual lecture, or whether, the food you ate, and it's bothering you while you're sitting there, or whether you're thirsty, whatever it is. You're squirming. You really can't sit, still that long, or you aren't uncomfortable. So you start moving positions, or you try to hear something, you try to take a note on it. By that time, the teacher has gone on to 4 other things, and then moved on. And then you start to, then you can't, then you're sort of perplexed because you really don't know what took place between the time you were writing and the time the teacher moved on. So there's a lot of things. And I purposely have some things in my study skills class that I address with that. We actually have a whole couple of weeks we address in listening skills to basically mainly make the students aware that listening takes an effort. Actually, when you listen, your heart rate goes up. Your blood pressure goes up because you are intently listening for what you have to gather. But if you're just casually listening, which I think what most kids would probably do if they're in school, they're casually listening, then that's not going to happen. And I think also today, because we like to multitask, there's music playing, there's maybe a game on or TV, you hear, people talking in the background, you hear all these other noises that are going on around you. When we do get quiet to listen to one thing that's being said, we have a hard time really focusing on that one thing. So that's something that I have seen. I see it in my own students sometime, even whether they're in person or online. You can see when they're focusing on you, and you can see where their mind has gone somewhere else. Unfortunately, this year, the classroom I have was right beside a construction site. They're building a new highway right beside the building that's going to go over 485 right in the Indian Trail. And so sometimes there was construction equipment out there. And of course, the windows are right there. So I could see eyes just going right to the construction equipment. There's windows there. I saw it with my own kids, when I would homeschool. And so you can just see whether if they're there with you or if they're not. And, you'd have to, pull them back in or ask them questions or, get them back engaged in this. But yes, listening is something that is it's something that we have to intently do and learn to do. And I think in this day and age that we're in, it's really becoming a problem to be able to actually do that effectively.
So, question, because I really want to go back to mastery, but before I do that, you were talking about the distractions and the multitasking. So, and as a parent myself, and just with kids in general, I've heard one teacher talk about how our kids are taught to multitask because they watch their parents. We tell our kids don't text and drive, but they're sitting in the back seat and they see us, and we're driving and we're texting and say, "Hey, I can do this because I'm grown and I've been driving for 20 years." And they see us sitting at the table eating and we're on our phones. They see us in a conversation and we're looking off and doing other things. So they sort of learn that multitasking is the way to do it. So is there a way, or should we teach kids just how to be quiet? I know I talk to my kids in the class, and even my own kids, I you all are never quiet. You always have music going on. You always have the TV on. You're always having a conversation. Are there any time when you just sit and you're just quiet? So is it important for us to structure some quiet time for young people? And if it is important, how do we do that?
It's important. One thing that I've learned and that I teach my students in study skills, and I teach them, even though I have a study skills class that's specific for study skills, a lot of the things that I teach in my literary analysis classes and in the writing classes are also study skills that I don't call them study skills, but they are still skills that they are learning that would fall under either executive functioning or study skills. I do think that we should have quiet time. Our brain actually can only take in but so much at a time. And our brain can actually only process so much at a time. And then it starts to really spit out. Some people say, oh, I got a headache for this. Well, you just try to put too much in at one time. And maybe you also try to put too much in from too many different sources at one time. So I think we do need to try to practice that. One of the things that I also do, especially in my writing classes, I purposely give students some writing topics for them to choose from that are about these types of things, regarding.
So they're teaching themselves
Right. They
what
end
you
up
want them to know.
researching these
Yeah.
topics and teaching themselves. I give them a lot of array of different topics. I don't want them to say, okay, I want you to all write on this, because I want them to, because somebody may say, well, I really don't like that topic. But if you have 20 different topics to choose from, and a lot of them are going to be topics that are of value for you to learn about yourself. Like in my advanced writing class, I have the students write about topics where teenagers can have addictions. And one of the addictions that we talk about, not only social media, because that's a big one, and the different various types of social media, but also energy drinks and even
Yeah.
exercise. And I think this year when students did theirs and they do presentations on energy drinks, they were really shocked and surprised at the things they found out about that, or even the additives in our food, different types of additives that we have. So I purposely give them topics that they can actually explore and find out for themselves the things that are happening. I just read yesterday how listening to music in your ear is really somewhat frying your brain. I always said these things to our sons, because we have grandsons. I have a 16-year-old grandson and a 12-year-old and almost 4-year-old grandson. And of course, the oldest one, particularly, he loves, the music and everything else, but years ago, I introduced a topic that talked about, cell phone usage and the radiation and all the MFFs and all the other things that radiate from cell phone usage or from any type of electronic usage that we have, and what's happening when we use these things constantly, or we have them in our ears constantly and things of that nature. So I try to get them to see for themselves, to learn. So research is really important for them to learn how to research and to find out, and then to present that information to all the rest of the class.
So you're not telling them the truth. They go research the truth, find it out for themselves, and they can find out whatever information they want to find out. Then, after they find out the information, then they come back and teach the information.
Right.
So they're getting a double dose, huh?
Right. Then they present it to the rest of the class. Yes. I found out years later, actually, this evolved from the study skills class, that especially in the homeschool community, students do not get many opportunities to present information. And so as a result of that, actually, I have research papers and presentations in all my classes, at least once a year. Some are doing it more than once a year, depending upon what the topic is and what we're doing. But even from the junior level classes, which is the 5th grade classes up to the 12th grade classes, they're all doing projects or presentations. And so for all of those, they're learning these different skills to actually be able to present this information.
Yeah, what I think is so cool about that is that, we act like you're just doing a research paper and presenting it. But the truth of the matter is, once you get out of school, you're going to have to go in for an interview for a job. And that is going to be you presenting yourself in front of one person or many people. And then let's say you're hired. Now you got to present yourself to the rest of your team you're going to be working with. So going through life, there's going to be a bunch of pitches and presentations throughout your entire life. And this is the breeding ground to get kids to learn how to do that, and at least get comfortable in knowing how to present themselves. And let's go back real quick to mastery, because mastery, just that term in general, is so cool. I was teaching a class on, it was a biology class, anatomy class, or one of those. But the whole point was digestion. And there's a whole bunch of details about digestion that you want the kids to know for the test. But I started off with, do you even know what happens from the time the food is on your plate to the time that same food is in the toilet? So I wanted them to have a global understanding of just that. And then once you get that, then we can fill in the little gaps of pieces and everything. But back when you talked about mastery, I want you to tell me, how do you know when one of your kids or one of your students have mastered something? Because you said the one thing that you want them to have is mastery in a certain area. So how do you know when a child has mastered something?
Well, for one thing, especially in writing, writing is a process. And I try
Yes.
to tell students that it is a process. Although many students will say, okay, I'm writing my paragraph. I wrote my paragraph. Here's my paragraph. Here's my paper. And it doesn't work that way. I always try to equate it with, students who are involved in a sport. I said, look, if you wanted to play soccer, you saw soccer, when you were younger, t-ball or whatever, baseball, whatever, you started somewhere. You had to learn the process. You had to go through all the drills and all the behind the scenes things, even though you may play baseball or you may play the sports, but you're still in the weight room, you're still doing all kinds of calisthenics, all kinds of things to strengthen your body to be able to do that. You do the exact same thing in writing. If you're playing an instrument, which I can relate to because I, played instruments. You have to have that dexterity in your fingers. You have to be able to have muscle memory. Well, you have muscle memory also, of course, in sports, but you also have to have muscle memory. Whatever you're involved in, you
Yes.
didn't actually just wake up one day and you were proficient at doing whatever that was. There may be a few people that could do that, but for the most part, 99.9% of us on this earth can't do that. So there's a process that you have to learn. And in learning that process, and I try, and which is why I really like the Right Shop curriculum when I learned about it, because it's a very incremental curriculum. It actually every skill builds on the previous
Skill.
and you learn this skill, then you learn skill 2. So you have 1 and 2. Then you learn skill 3. And it doesn't happen every week, but you're utilizing and you're exercising all those different skills that you're learning throughout the time. The first parts of Right Shop Junior are really helping the students to really gather a love for writing and expressing themselves. When I see students incorporating the skills that they've learned effectively, when I look at what students start at the beginning of the year and how they end at the end of the year in an introduction class, they would have gone through 20 different types of skills to incorporate in their papers. And I'm not interested initially in the quantity of what they write. I had a student one year who would write 6-page stories almost every time, but they were and 6 pages, oh, that's very impressive. But most of it was repetitive. So
Okay.
I'm really interested in the quality of what students write instead of the quantity. Because if you can
Okay.
write a good quality paragraph, it can be 5 well-written sentences. You can actually end up incorporating compound and complex sentences. It could be 5 that end up taking up a whole page that are really well-defined and create good imagery in those sentences. Then it's a lot better than someone who may have written 6 pages and it's very repetitious. So the main thing is to help students to really truly understand how to utilize those tools that they learn systematically throughout the different classes. And then I review those tools as even in the upper level, the advanced writing, we're reviewing those tools. We're adding other additional elements into that to help the students master it. I also have a checklist with every single essay that we write. So and it's unique to that particular essay, whatever we're writing. So the students know they have a checklist and I have a checklist, which looks it's the exact same thing, except for mine. I have places for comments, places that it says that you did this well. You have to improve on this, so that they know exactly what they did, what they need to improve on. I read every single essay that we do. Now I do have assignments like I do start with grammar, or any assignment that there is a key to, there's only one answer to. My husband will grade those. And we also grade we have an online grade management system. So grades are uploaded online. And then, of course, my husband and I will talk to each other, about, well, this student didn't do well on this, or there's a problem with this. You may want to look at that so that we can know whether I need to go back over something or whether everybody really grasps that particular grammar concept. But when I see what the students have done in their essays, how they are taking what we have gone over, and I look at their final copies, when they send me their papers, they're sending me everything from brainstorming to their sloppy copy that they write, which is like the rough draft, their checklist. I want to see their whole writing process. That also helps me to see how they actually learn, right? Then in doing that, I can see their progress. And every now and then you get students that don't want to do that process, and they'll send me a paper and I'll say, well, I know you didn't do the checklist because, 99% of the things that were required are not in your essay. And so that helps them to really master. And the students that follow that consistently throughout
Process. Yeah.
is the process, they end up being phenomenal writers. And I hear from from prior students I've taught before, many years even after I've taught them, and how that's been helpful to them. But you did mention about presenting something, and I didn't want to just
Yeah.
relay this one thing to you. I had a student quite a few years ago who went for a job interview. He was in high school and for a job interview, and he said the job interview, and I think it was a place like a fast food place, but it wasn't one of the standard fast food places. It was probably like a one person owned place that sold some salads or something, and the person had to write an essay. He was really surprised that he was asked to write an essay.
Write an essay for a job
It was
at a fast
it was
food
a
restaurant?
job, yes. And
Okay.
he wrote an essay, and the person who hired him was so impressed with how he wrote that he said, "Well, I know you've studied, you've learned a lot from being able to write this way," and he hired him right away. But the one thing else I want to say is I found, and most of this is from what my students tell me, because it wasn't this way when I was going to get jobs, is that most of the time you have to present yourself online. You have to write information down before you can even get an opportunity to possibly get an interview.
That's correct.
And then if they are really, really interested, they would that time bring you in. But it was no longer. So you really have to present yourself first on paper before you can present yourself in person. I'm not sure when that changed, but because of that, students have to be able to write clearly, succinctly, have to be able to present themselves in a way that they're clearly representing who they are, or their point of view, their worldview, and so forth.
In addition to that, a lot of jobs now, when you turn in a resume or put in your application, they take your name, they put that name on Facebook.
Yes,
And so you have like a digital presentation and you have that paper presentation that the job or the interview or even your coworkers already know before you show up.
exactly.
So that's a pretty big deal, being able to present yourself in the light that you want to be seen as.
Exactly.
My goodness.
Yes.
Now let's talk about the other thing I want to talk about is attention and focus, because we were talking about distractions and everything. So as far as parents, we already talked about quiet time. We need the instructions for quiet time. But as parents and instructors, you have 20 people in your class or whatever. So you personally, you already know when you're going to start a class, like what their learning style is, or do you just make sure that you hit all of them with all the kids? How does that work with you?
It's sort of by lesson in some cases. It really depends. Um, I try to set up the class in basically the same way all the time. We start with really looking at our homework log. What is going to be for homework? The homework log that I give the students at the beginning of the year, I give the students homework for the entire year. They know
Okay.
exactly what they're going to have to do, whether it's September the 1st, January the 1st, whatever the date is, they know exactly when things are going to be due. And that includes, I do an online grammar program. So that's the online grammar all the assignments. Now, I will say that there are times I've had to tweak that in class, and I've had to tell them, okay, I'm moving this, I'm changing this, or I'm deleting this, or whatever it is, or I'm adding something that I have to add, for whatever reason. So they know the standard format for what class will be. Homework log is also color coded for those visual learners.
Okay.
As well. It's color coded so they can see, oh, this is a homework assignment. Oh, this is a first draft. These are the dates. My husband, actually, he's auditory, but he also has some visual. So he actually crafted that. And he's the one that actually puts that together after I do input, and then he puts that together at the during the summer. We do a lot of planning over the summertime.
Uh-huh.
But then after that, we always do grammar. And whenever I do grammar, whenever I'm doing grammar, I'm doing it on paper and auditory, and then sometimes I will do some things on the board, or I'll have the students do things. I will have them read sentences for me or read answers so that I can make sure they're understanding what the concept is for whatever we're doing in grammar. And then we'll go on to our lesson. So what the lesson is, if we are going over a particular concept, one of the first concepts that we go over, say in the introduction class, is learning how to delete those to be verbs using stronger verbs. And so I'll have the students read sentences to me, so to make sure that they're doing that. And we do that throughout the year. I'll have them read sentences. They're reading short excerpts of scenarios that they write in class. And I always tell them I'm not expecting it to be perfect in class because we only have an hour for class, and there are some students that, and I don't try to pressure them. I try to encourage them. There are some students that sort of freeze in class. You ask them to write something, they have 15 minutes. Some students will, pick up a pen or pencil and they'll go to work right away. Ideas are flowing, they'll go to work right away. And before you know it, their pencils are down. There are others that may stare at the paper for 12 minutes and then they finally pick up the pencil, the paper. They'll write a little bit, they'll write something, but not everybody, would do the same, will do it the exact same way. So it's interesting. I have a question that I think it's in my maybe my level 2 class, where it's actually on parallelism, but the statement is, in class, I write this way. At home, I write this way. And they have actually add. So sometimes some of my sentences that I ask them to complete actually give me a little bit more insight into who they are as well. So in that particular sentence, some of them will say, well, in class, I feel rushed to write. At home, I feel more relaxed, or, at home, I can sit and I talk about that also in my study skills class, how you have to set up your own study place,
Your atmosphere.
your atmosphere. And it makes a big
Yeah.
difference. It makes a really big difference. And that also makes a big difference in retention and studying and a whole lot of other things that you would need to actually do. But in class and in the different lessons, I try to incorporate as much of those main 3 learning styles that I can. And so it happens throughout the actual lesson. And in some lessons, it may weigh more to lecture, especially if it's a literary analysis class. There's some classes in literary analysis where I'm almost all lecture, or we're lecture part of the time. They're answering questions, and then we watch, because I do have quite a few of the books and short stories that we do on video. Or we always talk about authors, and I bring a lot of videos in regarding that when we're talking. So it just really depends on what the topic is, what we're studying, and for me to incorporate all those. But it's incorporated in there somewhere.
Okay. And so, like with each student, do you know each student's like primary learning style, or you like you said, you just make sure you hit all of them, and then if they're having problem grasping a concept, then you go in deep on that one.
Well, for all my study skills class students, I do, because one of the first things we do is I have quite a few questionnaires. They're called questionnaires, test quizzes, depending upon which source I'm using. But the students are asked to find out what their learning style is by taking these questionnaires and tests. And then they have to write about it themselves. They have to write about what they found out, how relevant it is to them. Were they shocked that they found out type of learner they are? Some people will say, well, I really thought I was this kind of learner, but according to what I've read and my answers, it shows that I'm more leaning in this direction. And then when they think about it, say, well, yeah, I really am more of, this kind of learner versus another kind of learner. So for those class students, I already know, because they're writing information. We're talking about it in class. It's a very relaxed self-discovery type class. That's project.
Self-discovery.
Right.
That's good.
That's for the study skills class. For the other classes, I usually have to look at the students. I have to see how, see their attention in class, see how they respond. Now, I have some students that I will say, okay, we're making a change on your homework log. And I will see many students pick up the pencil to make the change on the paper. I'll see others that will not. And so at that point, either they, their mind was somewhere else, and I have to say, okay, everybody needs to pick up your pencil. You need to make this change on the paper. I may be changing a due date from one date to another date. Or I'll have students who will send me an email and ask me a question about the exact same thing that I talked about in class. So those are the times that I note those students. And I'll walk around the classroom and I'll make sure that, yes, did you understand this, or do you know this? And then I believe in being very open with my students. So I always want my students to feel comfortable in coming to me. So they can always email me. I have some students who call me, they can call me. I just tell them, don't call me past a certain time. Because if I didn't do that, I will have students that will call me 11 o'clock at night. They will text me. And I said, if you really have a problem that you really can't understand, we can set up a Zoom call where I can go over something. We can take a few minutes, a few minutes out of my day and their day to, Zoom back and forth. If there is an issue with a particular topic, we can do that. So I really want them to understand what it is, whatever it is, and to get over that hump that's preventing them from understanding that material.
Wow. Okay. Good. You said so much there. You said so much. What one thing that I love is that every child that you're dealing with is an individual.
Mhm.
Yeah, you might be getting it here, but if you're not getting over here, then I'm gonna give you extra time. I'm gonna give you extra attention. I'm gonna make any type of shift I need to make sure you get what I need you to get. And I just believe that that type of individual learning is not something we can always get. I heard someone say one time, I love all my children the same by treating them differently. So that's what it sounds like you're doing. You love all your kids the same,
Exactly.
but different kids need different things, and then whatever they need, you give them that.
Right.
That
Well,
that's perfect.
I offer it to them. Now there are some students.
You can't make them take it, huh?
Right, exactly. There are some students, and I always tell them I won't bite. You can always, you can come to me after class. You can email me or something, because I can tell there's some students when I give them their papers back. Uh, and like I had an assignment this past week that actually I decided that I was just going to scrap the assignment. And it was one of my Hamlet assignments, and so I know the students know Hamlet really, really, really well. When I look back over the plot line issues, because it was about plot lines, it was a little bit confusing to them. And not only that, but Hamlet has multiple climaxes and all kinds of plot issues going on. And so I said, these students are not getting this. We're not going to get this in the next couple of weeks of class. It would take me a good several weeks to go over all the different subplots and everything. And then I have to also weigh, is this really relevant for them understanding the story of Hamlet? And so I decided, no, I sent them a message. We're just going to scrap this assignment. I could see in their answers that it really was very confusing to them. And it would just take me too long to try to explain all the different subplots and so forth. They'll get all that in college if they're going to take read a Shakespearean play at college.
Wow, but that's cool that you would shift like that, because a lot of parents or teachers and adults say, "Yeah, hey, I give you this assignment. Hey, you're gonna do it, and I'm just gonna roll with it."
Yeah.
But that's cool for you to pivot like that in the middle of something.
Yeah. No, I really want this. Well, for one thing, with some of the assignments, I want to make sure the assignments are going to be are really good assignments for the students to grasp understanding.
Uh-huh.
One thing that, in the homeschool community, of course, I am coming alongside the families to help them with their classes. So I
Right.
do provide parents the opportunity to excuse their student from an assignment. But I tell them at the same time, because the assignments are progressive, you don't want to excuse your child from an assignment. Maybe they were sick, or they were or on vacation, or whatever it was, and then they don't understand the next step that we're doing because you excused them from an assignment that they needed to have a foundation on. So I want them which is one reason why I give the whole homework log at the beginning of the year, because I have students that even come to class via Zoom on vacation. Some will, because I do Zoom on Tuesdays. I do Zoom whenever a child is sick, or there's sickness in the family. Students can come to class, still get to class. Sometimes I record a class if I need to record a class, and I can email it to a student so that the students still have the benefit of that particular class and they're not missing anything in that particular class. So I do want to make sure that whatever we are doing is going to be something that the students can benefit from. And if I see that this is an assignment that does not fit into the category of either them fully benefiting from it at the time without me going into a lot of extensive detail, it's not relevant to exactly what they need to understand this topic, then there's no problem with me having to pivot. There are times that I've had to bring other assignments in, especially with grammar. Students are not understanding the concept of writing compound complex sentences. That tends to be a really big issue with many students, and just breaking it down. And at times I've had to add assignments into class. Or I've had to say, okay, we're going to scrap this one. I'm going to bring this one in, and we're going to work on this assignment, or we're going to take the whole day and we're going to work, we're going to go over these. So it really depends. I have some flexibility that I've actually built into my schedule
The class.
so that I
Yeah.
can actually do that. with the students. There are times that I will say, okay, we have a test on this, a test on this particular topic in grammar coming up, but I know the kids are really not ready. And there may be a few kids that would really do well on it and everybody else would fail it. So to me, that's not acceptable. So I want to make sure I will say, well, we're going to move this test a whole week later, and we're going to take this next time we have class and we're going to go over everything we need to go over. I need to make sure that you fully understand what this concept is before we move on.
Yeah. I picked up on something you just said. That's not acceptable.
Mhm.
So it's not acceptable for you not to get this information. I need you to get this information and I'm gonna do whatever it takes.
Right.
So something else that when I hear you talk, I keep on hearing you say certain things. And to me as a parent and even as a student, I'm thinking of the phrase, there's no excuse. I say that because here's an interesting story. I was at a house the other day and I was doing like a home evaluation, walking through like a stranger's house, making sure that it's set up so the person could go home and be safe. And all of a sudden, I made a comment about how nice something in the house was. And the woman that lived there, she might have been in her late 60s or something like that. She said, I did that. I made the table. I did this whole wall. I said, really? Are you a carpenter, by trade? And she said, no, I just got on YouTube. And it's like even someone that didn't grow up in this whole YouTube age, if they want to know something out there is available. Education is free. You
Mhm.
can get out and learn anything you want to learn.
Correct.
So when I think about you and think about all the different steps that you have in place to make sure that there's no excuses and you get what you need to get, I think it's a perfect scenario of saying that, hey, it's here if you want it.
Mhm.
All you have to do is ask. All you have to do is text me, call me, or whatever. But it's here, and there's no excuse. And I have to tell you, I'm still like on my first page of notes, so I'm about to skip down because I want to talk about this. Yeah, I'm having a great time talking to you, and so, but I have to respect your time, and I want to talk about the writer's toolbox. Tell me about the writer's toolbox, what that is, how beneficial is that to the students, how'd you create it? Just go for it. The writer's toolbox.
Okay. Well, the Writer's Toolbox really is the umbrella name for all the classes. And God gave me that name. I had no idea what I was going to call the classes when I started teaching. I just had a Write Shop 1 book. I had a Write Shop 2 book. I was learning about Write Shop in the classes. And then I also had the study skills class that I had taught my daughter in Maryland and that people were asking for here because I had also taught it here in a co-op. And so I said, well, maybe I need to put all these together. And so that was the name because that was the name that God gave me, because really the skills that you need are tools that you're going to use to enhance your writing, explain your writing, provide more unity and clarity. These are all tools that are used to help you to do that. It's the same thing with anybody else. Gardeners use tools, mechanics use tools, everybody uses tools. So it's the same thing. And my father actually was also an industrial artist. He could draw about anything you wanted. He created the first logo that I had. I don't like using his logo now. Actually, I used his logo to create the graphic artist to create the logo that I have now. But he did draw me a picture of a toolbox, the ones that you have a handle on, and with all these different tools coming out, and each tool had a particular type of a writing skill on it, which is similar to the one that I'm using now. So except for it's more like a suitcase than I guess it's still a handheld toolbox. And so that's where that name came from. And then all the classes that I teach actually many of them have come from parents who have wanted to have a different class. So for instance,
Okay.
I started with the introduction to writing class, which was the first class I ever taught, the Write Shop 1, using Write Shop 1. And then I went into Write Shop 2. I taught Write Shop 2 for 2 years as a Write Shop 2 book, but I found out it went really fast for many of the students. And unless these students were really motivated writers, some of them did not do as well in grasping some of the concepts to write some of the essays. So I immediately divided that into 2 years. So that became Intermediate 1 and Intermediate 2. Where Intermediate 1, we focus on an eclectic mix of descriptive writing, narrative writing. We do poetic writing. Students write a poem analysis essay. We also do a literary analysis essay, and then they do a research report where they're introduced to primary and secondary sources. The next year in the level 2, the second half of the same book is all essay writing. And then I introduced persuasion and the rhetorical triangle and using persuasion in advertising, which is one of the first things that I do so the students can see how persuasion is all around us. We see it,
All
we
around us.
use it,
Yes.
we are swayed by it, but then how do we avoid being swayed in the wrong direction with advertising? And I get a little bit more into fallacies in the advanced writing class. So all the classes really started evolving into classes that were asked for. Students after the level 2 class, parents would ask me, well, do you have anything after that? And then I started looking, well, okay, I can do an advanced writing class. Well, let's just take some of these elements that we're on. And so in my advanced writing class, we look at college admission essays, AT essays. And the SAT essay has come and gone in that class only because at times it was really relevant and then times it wasn't. And then it came relevant again and then it wasn't relative. So if it's relevant, I'll bring that unit back. But in that class, I also talk about rhetorical devices. So the students learn about 60 some rhetorical devices, along with, of course, the appeals that we do. But they're learning to defend their position on many different topics. So it's really all persuasive writing from various points of view on using various types of appeals. And then at the end of the year, everything culminates to a project on being able to discern media and fallacies that may be in media and how to discern if truth from things that are not true or truth from reality from unreality. So we look at that. And my literary classes also have sprung from that. I have done American Lit class. I've done one that's a 1-year class where we sort of breeze through American Lit. I've done a 2-year American Lit class. Then I have some eclectic classes in literature where we do maybe a American Lit book, a British Lit book. We'll do a World Lit book. And so I've taught about 25 different books along the way that I still have on my notes for each one of those that I've taught. Then I have the literary analysis that I teach that's more analytical as well as the actual book. So, and then on the other side, I started teaching the Write Shop Junior classes, which I started with the 4th, 5th, and 6th graders. Being a Write Shop representative helped me to see a lot of of course, what they offer. They do start in the kindergarten level, but I had many students who I was teaching older siblings and their parents wanted, do you have anything for younger students? And I said, well, okay, we can start. In fact, I started with many of the beta program. The first time we taught Write Shop Junior E, we were it wasn't even offered. We were the beta test for that book. And so I actually had to print the book at my house, which I said I would never do that again. That was really, really difficult to have to print that book for all the students. And also some things were in color, some were not, trying to put it all together. But anyway, my husband and I did that for summer 1 year. And throughout the year, I touched base with the creators of Write Shop. We actually became friends. The two ladies who wrote, they're both from California. They have since retired and they sold it to Demi Learning. Demi Learning is the ones who are producing Write Shop now. But they had a really good program and they actually created it because they had sons and daughters. Their sons were sort of reluctant writers. The daughters were motivated writers. And it's like, how do we have a program that can address both? And so they came up with this program that once I saw it was shown to me, I thought it was a phenomenal program. I've had, phenomenal success in seeing the students who've gone through that program. So that's really how things came about. Every year I give a questionnaire to all my families that are current families, and I ask them, what would they like to see? What classes do they want? I provide them with an array of classes that they're interested in. I don't know if I'll create any new classes, but I will add to, like, next year, I'm adding some things regarding AI to the classes. When you ask me about anything new for next year, there are some classes that I'm adding a discussion and some assignments regarding AI. I think AI is here to stay and the students need to be aware of it, know what it's about, how to deal with it, how to identify it, how to use it for the good and not for, something that would be evil.
Well, let's get into that real quick because I do want you to sort of hype that up a little bit before we leave. But I want you to tell me real quick what it sounds like the whole thing with this writer's toolbox. You started somewhere, and then based upon the need that was created in your environment, then you just went in and satisfied the need. And then that just increased the different classes that were in the toolbox. So you didn't just wake up one morning and say, hey, kids need to read this and learn this. A need was actually expressed to you in the marketplace.
Yes.
And then you met the need.
Exactly.
Okay.
That's
That's perfect. That's perfect. Because a lot of times we want to start classes or we want to start subject matters, but there's no need. No one actually wants
Right.
what you're offering. And then you're wondering why your classes aren't growing and all that stuff because nobody wants what you're offering. So that's excellent. So now, yes, tell me what's next. Tell me what's coming up. Tell me what's big. Tell me about this new class because you know this AI chat GPT thing is big. So tell me how you are addressing that with the parents and the students.
Well, it's going to be new for next year. I've only mentioned it on my website and in the listing of the class topics that we're going to study. It will be in study skills, advanced writing, and the level 2 class, mainly regarding research. Because when you research a topic nowadays, usually AI provides you with the information right at the beginning. And also students need to know if they're going to use some of that, they'll need to know how to verify it. And they'll need to know how to cite it in their papers. The main thing is if you use it, that's fine, but you have to also cite it and you have to verify it because AI is not infallible. I mean, there are errors that AI will incorporate, but I want them to understand really what AI is. There are ways to craft different questions and prompts to provide you with information that you may need. And I want them to understand to use it as a research tool and not to use it as a tool to like write papers or to write information down that you may need. I have, even before AI came out, I talk about plagiarism in all the classes as well, especially starting in the introduction class, but it goes more in depth in the level 1 classes and of course my higher classes, because they have a better understanding of paraphrasing and using information and citing information and how to do that appropriately. The other thing is that my checklists that I use in my classes are very specific to that particular assignment, and not only specific to the assignment, but specific to the stylistic elements that students have to include, like the type of sentences that they need to have. And I have yet to see a paper that was submitted using AI that would have all of those elements in it. And then I also express to students that every student has a unique voice, just like you have a unique fingerprint. You have a unique voice in your writing. And I can usually tell when everybody is writing using their voice. Once I read a few of your papers, I can tell, okay, this is this student's paper. This doesn't really sound like this student. Or this student started writing, but then they sort of veered off somewhere. They came back, what's going on with this middle section here? So the main thing is that with your voice, and of course there's all kind of programs out that many schools utilize. They're too expensive for me to buy. At schools utilize, they run your papers through these programs to make sure, of course, you're not plagiarizing, that you are using sources. These sources actually do exist and so forth. But my main thing with AI is just is from the research side and helping students to know, yes, you can really use this tool to help you, but there's a lot of things you need to know about this tool that can be very detrimental. And so you need to just know what it is. I did propose that topic this year in my advanced writing class. I had several students write about it. And so it was something that we discussed at that level in that class, but I haven't previously brought it in any of the other classes. But next year, advanced writing study skills in level 2 will have a section on that where we will discuss it. And they have to do research in just about all of their assignments that they're working on.
Okay. So it'll be in those classes. It's not going to be a specific class on AI.
Right.
It'll be sprinkled in those classes.
Yes, it will be.
All right, beautiful.
Yes.
Okay. Next thing, real quick. So homeschooling parents and students, give me the top 2 or 3 practical strategies that you recommend for improving study skills or writing skills. Just give us 2 or 3 things that we can do like today.
Well, you can sign up for my classes.
That's number one.
Yes, you can sign up for classes and that will happen. But for study skills, I think the main thing is for students to learn how they learn. If you know how you learn, that will help you, because the onus is on students to take the information presented to them and then turn that into information that can help you learn the way you learn. I tell students, when you get into college, everything is auditory. You're going to have lectures, whether you're online or whether you're in person. Unless you're in a lab format, you're not going to have, or in a discussion format, which sometimes grad students may have, you're not going to have this back and forth. You're not going to have, it's all auditory. And so if you're not an auditory learner, you have to figure out, how am I going to take what my professor or teacher is giving to me and turn that into something that I can use. And so learning how you learn will be a really big, one of the biggest factors you can do. The other thing is learning how to use executive functioning skills, which are setting goals, time management. Time management is a really big one, of course, taking responsibility. And then I guess and overall is really the commitment. I think commitment is the one thing. You have to be committed to want to do what you have to do. So if you have a goal in study skills, I tell students, well, what is your goal? What do you want to do? Okay, you want to be a veterinarian. Okay, you've got a lot of years of school to do. You've got to take classes in high school. You've got to, you've got to have a goal where you're going to. Whereas a long-term goal, then you have to break it down into shorter-term goals, immediate goals, so that you can work towards whatever you have to work towards and have that commitment to actually do that. When it comes to writing, the main thing that you can do, the more you read, the better you write. The more you read quality books, the better you are going to write, because you're reading good, well-structured sentences, you're reading good themes and plots, and it doesn't have to be like a good book. I mean, there's some books that, I don't particularly like, but the author did an amazing job with the elements that they use, how they interwove all the themes together, all the different elements that are in the book are used there, which is one reason why I like, my level 2 class reads The Pearl, a very thin book. Some people read it in elementary school. It's a nice little story, but it's got all kinds of different literary elements that are in that book. So it's almost like a teacher equated this a long time ago as a book being like an onion. The more you peel it, more every layer comes off, there's more information in there. So, and then for other thing for actually writing is to really learn the tools that you need to successfully be able to write well. I think writing well is needed more in our society now. Both of my kids tell me that they have to write reports. My daughter is always writing, of course, notes into her patient's files. She has to write reports. She has to give presentations, reports to specialists regarding her patients. My son, being a special agent in the Air Force, every assignment that he has to write up. And there are people that he has told me that have been reprimanded because they can't write well in his unit. And he tells me
Wow.
many times, Mom, I am so glad that you taught me how to write well, because of course the Air Force, I mean, they really don't play when it comes to certain things. And so you're going to need your writing skills for just about everything you do in life. You're going to need to have some form and level of being able to write effectively, efficiently, and so forth. So those are the main things that you would really want your students to be able to have.
Yeah, excellent, excellent. Okay, so any closing remarks? Give us closing remarks for homeschool parents, homeschool kids. But I want you to tell us, even more importantly, because you shared a lot, I want you to let us know, how can we get in contact with you? How can we find you? How can we, give us your website, your Instagram, however you do what you do. How can we get in touch with you in order to get involved with these classes?
Okay. Well, first I'll say that the website name is the writerstoolbox.info, all one word, and you can find me there. My email is read to write. That's all one word, READTOWRITE @earthlink.net. And so parents can contact me, either way. You can also contact me on my telephone. My number is
Okay.
704-236-19. So I have parents contacting me in any one of those three. My website does give you a list of the classes, and the syllabus are listed there, details about the classes as well. So you can find that information there, but I'll be happy to also send it to families who may be interested in the classes as well. So I actually wrote down information about the closing. So I'm going to look at my notes to say what my final words actually were regarding the classes. And I think the final words is that parents and students need to know how valuable writing actually is. Writing is more than just putting your words on paper. Writing effectively. Writing incorporates time management. At least my writing classes do. Time management, taking responsibility for your writing, and maturing as an individual as well. I have seen students, who may not have taken it seriously at the beginning, and at the end, they've taken things a lot seriously. Also, I always tell my students, even in I say this in the study skills class, students have to learn how to take ownership of their learning.
Yes.
They don't see that at the younger levels. But once you especially get starting to with middle school and definitely by high school, you have to take ownership basically of your learning. Your parents have already taught you how to read and write. And the initial part of it, they've taught you, the basics of math. And so now you have to look at what your goals are, what you need to get to your goals. And, if your goal is to finish high school, then what do you need to finish high school? But many people, of course, these days you have to have goals beyond high school. You've got to know, what do you want to do? Do you want to do you want to learn a trade? Do you want to open a business? Do you want to go on the mission field? Wherever you want to go. I've had students who are in the mission field. They're still writing. They're writing reports. They're writing blogs. They're writing. My heart is always warmed when I get information from students, emails from students. I've had a couple of students who are lawyers now, students who got their doctorate degree, and some of them still tell me, yeah, I use some of those same skills that you taught me, 8 years ago, 10 years ago. And so you want to make sure that the students develop that love for writing. Now, I know everybody does not have a love for writing. There's some students that are very reluctant writers, which is what I have seen in my classes, students that have been reluctant writers to go from being reluctant, not wanting to write, to actually wanting to write more. So, and then of course, it depends on the grade level you put them in the class and where their mindset and attitude is, which we talk about attitude a lot in the study skills class. So I think commitment, taking responsibility are some of the main things, because a lot of the skills that you learn in, whether it's writing, literary analysis, or even study skills, they are life skills, like you mentioned before. These are things that transfer over into your life in all other formats of your life.
Every aspect of life.
Every aspect. Exactly. Exactly.
Well, wonderful. Kyra, thank you so much for just being here and sharing your heart and really giving the detailed outlook of like what the writer's toolbox is and how it can benefit. Because a lot of people were teaching classes like for now, but like you're teaching a class now that's going to benefit kids for the rest of their life in all aspects of their life. So I appreciate you so much for being here.
Well,
And I trust that you would have a wonderful day. And I love the fact that we didn't talk about this, but you talked about the fact that you're relying on God to show himself strong in all the little decisions that you make as far as what class to do. And I love the fact that you and your husband are doing this thing together.
yes.
So all that, I didn't ask any specific questions, but you weaved it through everything that you talked about. So I really appreciate you and your time. And I wish you all the best and blessings to you and to your husband.
Well, thank you very much, Lynn. It's been my pleasure to discuss these things with you. Thank you for having me today, and wish you a blessed day as well.
Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Thank you for staying to the very end and listening to this entire podcast. I really do appreciate it. And I want you to do me a couple favors. One favor is I want you to leave something in the comments. If there's someone or some industry that you would like for me to interview that would help progress or support you in your homeschooling journey. Also, I want you to subscribe and share this podcast with some of your friends or family that are raising kids and are in the homeschool community. So once again, thank you so much for joining us. This is Lynn Pierre with Homeschool Aficionado. I'll see you next time.